Well, good evening. Hope everybody's doing well tonight. Glad you're able to watch this video. And we're going to talk about a controversial subject tonight, but I thought it'd be good to talk about. And that being, should churches defy the government and meet? I got a lot to say about this, so bear with me. Let's ask a couple questions here. First, who has authority over the church? Does an association or a denomination have authority over the church? The answer is no. An association or denominational head has no authority over the church. Now, how about the government? Does the government at the local, state, or federal level have any authority over the local church? The answer is no. So the only one that has authority over the church would be God in that individual congregation. It's the Lord's church, and the local congregation must make its decisions independent of any other organization or entity. They have no authority over it. And with that said, there are some guidelines for which we're to operate by. In our obedience to God, He tells us in Romans 13 that in verse 1 that we're to be subject to the higher powers. That is a reference to government. So while government has no authority over the church, God tells the church to submit to the authority of government. Now, there's an exception clause to that, and that's when the government is leading the church to do something that is contrary to the Scriptures. And we see a very clear teaching of that in Acts chapter 5 and verse 29, where the apostles say it was better to obey God rather than man. Now we run into this bit of a little sticky situation here, because the Scriptures command us that we are to assemble, meet. And Hebrews 10:25, forsake not the assembling of yourselves together. And so that's a command of God to be in church. Well, what's happening right now is, and this is where things vary from state to state. And so I'm going to kind of frame everything around Massachusetts because that's where I'm at. I do understand things vary from state to state, and I do understand that. So Massachusetts has deemed churches essential, meaning they are allowed to be open. But they have asked that they have not more than 10 people in their church, and really that there is to be no meeting anywhere of more than 10 people. Now, being fair and honest, the state has been very hypocritical in that, because you go to the grocery store and there is far exceeding 10 people there. And I remember when the ruling first went out that there was, chaos at the grocery store and at the liquor store. And so, there's this rule of not more than 10 people, but then they exempt certain people from it. All right. And now, to the state's credit, I think they realized that that was kind of an error of not putting some more clear policies in place. And so they've gone back to the grocery stores and liquor stores and other stores that are still open. And basically, and I don't know exactly all the nuances of this, but like you go to Market Basket now, they're not letting everybody in. They have a set number in that building based upon the size of the building, all right? So they're trying to spread people out. They're only letting in so many people depending on the size of that store. I think that's fair. Now, to which I ask, why is that not done for churches? I mean, it makes absolutely no sense to draw a flat line of 10 people for a church, because you could be a church plant in a small little location that only seats 25 people, but you can have 10 people. But then you could be a church that seats 200 people, but you can only have 10 people. Where does that make sense? It makes no sense. Why not have some formula that they figured out for the grocery store? Why not have that for churches as well? It makes absolutely no sense at all. And so limiting the churches to 10 is just a very arbitrary number, and it can't be that hard to come up with some different formula that they did for grocery stores. Now, moving on, we see that churches have tried to get creative. Some of them have done drive-in services. And, quickly, and this, again, varies from state to state and then really from town to town. But in certain places, and I had not heard about this in Massachusetts, I'm not saying it hasn't happened, but in certain places, as maybe we have heard, states or towns were banning people from having drive-in services when they don't even leave their car. I mean, my word, you go to the grocery store, you go to Home Depot, you're going to get out of your car. And then even then when they were supposed to have, well, you can do it, but you can't get out of your car, and you got to park this far apart. Well, is that being enforced at grocery stores? Is that being enforced at Walmart? Is that being enforced at Home Depot? No, it's hypocritical. It's religious discrimination is what it is. And so, it is hypocritical rulings. Now, some churches are tired of this. They're tired of the blatant inconsistencies, and I agree with them. And some churches are, because of these inconsistencies, are preparing to hold services. Now, the question is, should they? And I want to give you 3 considerations. First, how will that be perceived by your church people? Look, if you got people working in the medical field who are dealing with death, they're probably going to have a problem with that. If you have a people that are pro and supportive and understanding and practicing in social distancing, and you're going to compel them to violate their conscience by coming to church when they're going nowhere, they're probably going to have a problem with that. The dynamic of your church factors in. And this is going to vary from church to church. I mean, how crowded is your church? If you're a small church in a big building and very spread out, people probably are not going to be too bothered by that. If you're a smaller building with a lot of people are probably going to be bothered by that. So that factors. What's the demographic? What's the demographic of your church? Is it young, old, good health, bad health? These factors in. All these things factor in. What's the spiritual maturity of your church? And the thing is this, is that only the pastor can make this determination. How will it be received amongst your people? And you ought to care, because you're there for them. They're not there for you. I don't know where we got this in our head, that the congregation's there to help the pastor. Where do we get that in the Bible? No, the pastor is there for the people. He's the shepherd of the flock. And you got to know your people. Secondly, how will your decision be received by your community? If your community is growing tired if it's a rural area and there's next to no cases and they're tired of this stuff, they might be supportive of you in that decision. So, if your community grows tired of the restrictions because it's been an area that's minimally affected, you might have community support. But if your community generally has embraced the social distancing concept, you might be shooting yourself in the foot. Because the very people that you're trying to reach may view you as selfish and not caring about the well-being of others. So in the short term, you benefit yourself by bringing people in for a meeting, for church. But in the long term, you potentially damage your reputation amongst the people that you're trying to reach, and you're hurting the church long term. Now, this is realistic. This is a valid consideration. And if your attitude is, well, bless God, I don't want them anyways, well, that's the wrong attitude, because God put you in that town to reach those people. So if you're going to do services, 3 questions. How would it be perceived by your people? And if you're simply going to say, well, if you're not comfortable, stay home, that's fine. But just know this, you might lose some people over that. And I did a message on like a month or so ago, and I talked about how pastors are in a no-win situation, and that still stands. You're not going to win. You're going to make somebody upset, so you just accept it. All right? But you do need to know how it's going to be perceived by the people. You do need to know how it's going to be perceived by your community, because that's the people you're trying to reach that don't know the Lord. And then thirdly, what is the Lord telling you to do? What is God, the Holy Spirit of God, leading you to do? Not the president, not the governor, not the mayor. Look, the reality is this. If you're going to have church next Sunday or whenever, until this thing is cleared up, you are taking a risk. You're taking a big, big risk. And you're gambling with God's house. So I'm not saying don't do it. I'm just saying know what you're doing. You're taking a big risk. You are, and by the way, it's a risk that I believe legally you have the right to take. But it's a risk that probably is not in the best interests of most, particularly in Massachusetts, particularly if you're in an urban area or suburban area that's densely populated. Why? First, you're risking the health of the people. We just had our first member test positive today. All right? Now, if that person wasn't there last week, but if they were, and I had a church full of people, where do you think that puts me? Well, listen, you pack it out, you're going to deal with it. So you better have a plan in place, because all your cleaning won't do a thing when people realize that they were sitting next to somebody who tested positive. It's not going to say, well, we cleaned. No one's going to care how much you cleaned. All right? So you better have a plan in place. Hopefully it doesn't happen, but you'd be wise to have one, because it could. All right? And so you are risking the health of people, number one. Two, you are risking the wrath of government. You say, well, they don't. I'm just saying, right or wrong, you're risking that. Which, if God's leading you to do it, then do it. But don't just do it because a lawyer told you to, because another pastor told you to, because a member told you to. They have no jurisdiction at your church. God has the jurisdiction, and he speaks to the man of God of the direction of that church. Do not allow yourself to be swayed by the words of other people. I'm not saying don't get insight. I'm not saying don't bounce things off. But at the end of the day, you have to be able to stand before God and say, you know what? I did what you wanted me to do. Not what the brethren did, not what a lawyer here or there said, not what this member wanted me to do. Don't let anybody persuade you to do something that didn't come from God. God put you there to lead that church. Lead it by his leading, not the leading of somebody else. Because when the thing goes south, if it does, and hopefully it doesn't, but if you have problems, you don't want to kick yourself. You want to know that you have done what God wanted you to do. Now, Lifeline Baptist Church is going to follow the guidelines that Massachusetts has established, even if they are mildly hypocritical and inadvertently discriminatory against churches. I say those words carefully, because I do believe our state government is trying to do the best they can. I really do. I believe that. It's not like they had a year to plan for this thing. It's not like, they didn't. This thing just dropped in their lap and they had to make decisions. And as time goes on, I think they're getting a better handle on it. So I don't think they've done a bad job. I think they've done a good job. I think they're doing the best that they can. And I think inadvertently, churches have been a little bit discriminated against, because the inconsistencies are clear. And so, but with that said, we're going to follow their prescribed guidelines, which we have been. We've had services. We have not stopped services. We have no more than 10 people. And we'll continue to do that until they expand the number of people that we can have, and then we will do that. Right now, we're having 3 services on Sunday with 10 people in them. We are live streaming them. I am bringing in key people to run those tongue-tied, to run those services, okay? But then I'm allowing a few people who aren't doing anything to come. This Sunday, actually, I've got more people who want to come, so we're doing a Saturday night, 6 p.m. service. So that means Saturday, Sunday, in a 24-hour period, we're going to have 40 people come to church, perfectly within the guidelines as laid out by the state of Massachusetts. And, you know, my thing is this. I just don't understand why people just cancel church. I've never understood that. They just stopped having services. At least in Massachusetts, that was never said you had to do. I don't understand why people just stopped having churches, and now they're getting tired of not having church, so now they're going to, just go against, well, why not just do the 10 services and preach 4 or 5 times? What's wrong with that? That seems like a viable solution. I mean, unless you're lazy and don't like to preach. So, well, that's a long day. Get over it. You'll be all right. You're a tough guy. If more people want to come, we'll just have more services. I don't mind doing that. I think it's dumb. I don't think it's that. I don't think 10. I think 10 people in our church is ridiculous. When I go to the store, and I go to different places, and I see the hypocrisy of the whole thing, it annoys me. But I don't believe it's a deliberate thing against churches. I don't believe political leaders set out to discriminate against churches. I think it's a byproduct of a scenario. And I'll throw this out at you. I just read an article today. Lady, I don't even know who it was. Liberal whack job. And not all liberal people are whack jobs, but this one is. Because the whole premise of the article was this, is that right-wing Christianity, and whatever you want to, right-wing white Christianity is a greater threat to our country than terroristic Islam. And it used this whole thing of what churches are doing. And I thought that was stupid, but I also understand that sentiment exists. And it's real. And you need to make decisions in light of that fact that it's there. And I'm not saying you're afraid of it. I'm not saying you back down from it. I'm just saying you better make wise decisions. At the end of the day, everybody's got to make choices. And I'm not going to criticize somebody who chooses something different than I do. I've chosen my path and I feel comfortable about it. And another man may feel differently because he may have a different leading of the Lord, and for the various components I already gave you may come to a different conclusion. And the important thing to remember this is the autonomy of the local church. One man can have an opinion and an idea that works for his church, and therefore he should do that. But God may have a different leading for someone else in a different place, in a different scenario. And brethren, we should respect that. And while you may not do that, you should respect that. I feel like sometimes we've lost our autonomy, we've lost soul liberty concepts, and if you don't look, act, talk just like we do, then obviously you're not of God, and I don't know that that's the right thing. And that doesn't mean you would do it. And so as this thing develops, as people have been encouraged to have services over this weekend, many people are going to start doing that probably next week. Some are going to start doing that. I shouldn't say many, but some are going to start doing that in the coming weeks against their governmental orders. Consider these things and think them through before you make that decision. Hope these thoughts are helped. Just try to be logical. Just try to think it through. And wanted to give my thoughts out to you. And, so people of Lifeline, when you hear about other churches up and running or whatever, and we're not, that this is why. And, I'm comfortable with that decision. But we're going to keep doing what we've been doing, and we're going to keep looking to expand services as people want to come when they're comfortable with that. And Hopefully we can get more numbers in the coming weeks. Right now is not a good time in Massachusetts, obviously. And so hopefully in the coming weeks, as we head into the month of May, that things are a little bit better. Maybe we can get 25 or whatever the state allows. We'll graciously abide by that for the health of the people and the benefit of our community. Lord bless you. Have a great night.